The 2022 NBA draft takes place tomorrow, and the Charlotte Hornets hold 2 picks in the top 15, but they may have to make those picks without a head coach now that Kenny Atkinson decided to stay in Golden State and not take over as the Hornets' new head man in charge. And joining me to break all of that down, as well as the NBA draft and other Charlotte Hornets news, is Locked On Podcast host Walker Mehl. Walker, let's go ahead and dive into the Kenny Atkinson stuff. When you first heard the news about Atkinson, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I was surprised because this doesn't happen that often. I went back to Billy Donovan doing that with the Orlando Magic job that took place. He accepted it in 2007 and then decided to go back to Florida before ultimately coming back into the NBA. But it doesn't happen that often. And maybe you could make sense of it because Kenny Atkinson wants to go back with a championship team. You know, Steph Curry, he's crying. He wins a meaningful championship. Draymond Green's coming back, giving people the business. You can see how that rubs off on a top assistant, and now he's going to move up and be promoted because Mike Brown's going to Sacramento, right? A lot of that makes sense. My thing is, Chandler, like, there are a couple of other assistants, or excuse me, a couple of other reasons that have come out over the last few days that his family wanted to stay in the Bay Area, that the Hornets have this reputation of not paying their assistants. Now it's coming out that the Hornets might fire him after a decent job because they feel like that happened to James Borrego. Wasn't that all true before the negotiations took place, before he had the 3 meetings, including the final one with Michael Jordan? Ultimately, okay, he decides to go back to Golden State. It's surprising. I don't think it was handled well when Adrian Wojnarowski is the one that puts that information out first and apparently left the Hornets blindsided for at least some amount of time. But yeah, I think ultimately the Hornets have to move on, and we'll see who the next head coach is going to be.
Gotcha. And one of the guys who could be that next head coach is Mike D'Antoni, former Rockets head coach, former Phoenix Suns head coach, New York Knicks, Los Angeles Lakers head coach. Michael Jordan apparently had a meeting with him on Tuesday. Now, when you hear Mike D'Antoni's name, it's kind of, he's going to be going into a weird situation because he's kind of the second choice.
Right.
But when you hear his name, what's your thoughts on him becoming the new Hornets head coach, especially given his success developing point guards, turning good point guards into great point guards, and especially the fact that the Hornets have LaMelo Ball on the roster?
Absolutely. So when it was Kenny Atkinson and Mike D'Antoni as the 2 finalists to land this head coaching job, I was always in favor more so of Mike D'Antoni, but they decided to go with Kenny, and there were some things to like. Now we're going back here in Charlotte because they have to. I really like the way that the Hornets went after Mike D'Antoni pretty immediately after this news came out about Kenny going back to Golden State, just because I never bought into the fact that you can't go to your second option. You have to just refresh the coaching search. One, we don't have a ton of time for that with the NBA draft taking place Thursday night. And 2, if he was in the final group of those 2 guys, there were clearly a lot of things that you liked about him. And one of the things is something you mentioned, his relationship or the ability to develop those relationships with star players, such as he did with point guard Steve Nash, something that he did with who developed into a point guard, James Harden. And he adapted his offenses around both of those guys that worked. And what worked best that was tailored to them. I think Mike D'Antoni can do that with LaMelo Ball, and he can do it with the rest of this roster. Defensively, maybe he has to hire a couple of good guys on his staff, like Jeff Bezdelic, former Wake Forest head coach, former assistant with Houston, that did a lot of good stuff with that Rockets defense. Yep. Maybe that's a name you could bring back. Mike D'Antoni, more of an offensive guy, but I do like the way he fits with the star player here in Charlotte and the way that he's been able to be an innovator as far as offensive minds goes in the NBA for the last more than a decade now.
Yeah, for sure. Another note on Dantoni, he's also one of 7 coaches in NBA history to win 60 or more games in a season with multiple teams. Yeah, so that's not bad at all. But when you also look at other candidates out there, who are some of the other names out there that the Hornets could go after in the event that Dantoni opts out of becoming the head coach?
You start to get into some real problem territory just based off reputation if that happens. So if Kenny Atkinson backs out and Mike D'Antoni, that's probably how it gets a little embarrassing. At the same time, you have to move on. I think you would probably recycle some of the other names that were mentioned in this coaching search. David Vanterpool is an assistant coach that might gauge some interest again. We know Darvin Ham's now with the Lakers, so maybe you go to a Sean Sweeney, who was an assistant coach with the Dallas Mavericks last year and orchestrated that defense and had a huge turnaround for being one of the better defenses in the league after being one of the worst, all because of Sean Sweeney. Quinn Snyder's an interesting name that's out there now that wasn't necessarily a part of the initial coaching search because it took a while for the Jazz and Quinn Snyder to part ways. Ultimately, I think Snyder is going to end up in San Antonio after a year off of coaching. So I do think refreshing it might look a lot like going after some of these assistants that were also hot names to take that next job and just recycling them because you don't have any other better options at this point so late in the game.
Gotcha. Another name that I was kind of curious about is Terry Stotts. I mean, he was a former head coach in Portland, he's won 517 games as a head coach, was able to take Portland to the conference finals once, albeit they got swept by the Warriors. But what's your thoughts on maybe going with someone like Terry Stotts? Do you think they should maybe go after an assist and go the assistant route rather than going, I don't want to use the word retread, but going the retread route of hiring a guy who has head coaching experience?
No, it's a good name to bring up. I always feel like Terry Stotts is the forgotten about finalist. I don't think he got as much play as Mike D'Antoni and Kenny Atkinson, but he does fit the bill of at least providing some prior head coaching experience, which is something that has been a theme for the Charlotte Hornets this entire time. Kenny Atkinson, Dantoni, Terry Stotts, all have had some success coaching other franchises. So maybe that would make some sense to go back there and see if Terry would be interested in coaching the Hornets. I would rather go the assistant route. I just think, maybe retread is too strong of a word just because of its negative implications. I just would like to see the ceiling on some of these guys that have been assistants in the league. We can go back to pretty recent history and see first-year success stories with assistant coaches. Ime Udoka, first time being a head coach of the Boston Celtics, just took that team to 6 games with the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals. What about Nick Nurse, who was a first-time head coach with the Toronto Raptors in 2019, who won the championship against Golden State and did an excellent job with that franchise? You can see some of those success stories, and I like some of the reputations that were surrounding those assistants. That would be the route I would take. I don't think any of the names that we brought up, though, would be something I'd be really disappointed in.
Gotcha, for sure. All right, Walker, we're going to shift gears now to another topic of concern for the, not necessarily topic of concern, but topic of note for the Hornets this offseason. Their reported interest in Lakers point guard Russell Westbrook. Now, I'm a Lakers fan, so I can honestly admit the Westbrook experience in LA didn't go the way we wanted it to go, but he did average 18 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists per game, and down the stretch, he played a lot better than he did at the start of the season. But I was curious, what's your thoughts on the Hornets' potential interest in Russell Westbrook, and how would his style of play fit with LaMelo Ball's, and would it impact LaMelo's development in your opinion?
I would be afraid that would happen, and if it's a risk, then I'd rather just stay away from it altogether. I think the Hornets' interest is solely based on the financial implications. It's the fact that you'd be able to get off of Gordon Hayward's 2 years remaining on his contract, where he'll be making over $30 million each of those seasons, and or Terry Rozier, who is somebody that just agreed to a contract extension the past offseason, and he's going to be making close to $25 million for the next 4 years. It's a lot of money that you have on the books. And remember, you still have to pay Miles Bridges maybe a max contract. And the way that you would be able to free up some money long term is taking on Russell Westbrook's $47 million. It's a lot. 1-year deal, though. So at least you'd be able to get off of that after this season is done. I would be a fan of buying him out. So if this trade takes place, you would send Gordon Hayward, more salary filler, over to the Lakers or another team to make something happen here, whatever. You bring in Russell Westbrook. I would buy him out. Hopefully he doesn't cost that much against the payroll. He's off of the roster. And that way LaMelo Ball can't be affected by Russell Westbrook taking the basketball a lot out of LaMelo's hands. I do think it would deter some of that development we'd want to see from LaMelo. So yeah, I think it has to be completely financially driven. I don't see much sense for the Hornets to go after Russell if they view him as a commodity on the court. It has to be just to save a few bucks here and there, especially for the long-term future of this franchise.
For sure, yeah. With LaMelo, yeah, you have to think long-term. And then also, yeah, keeping Miles Bridges, that's got to be your top priority.
Huge,
You're
right.
definitely right about that. All right, Walker, wrapping up here. We're going to go ahead and dive into the NBA draft. Charlotte holds the 13th and 15th picks. who do you think the Hornets will decide to take in those positions? And what positions on the court do you think the Hornets need to fill and try to fill with their 3 picks in the draft?
It is the worst kept secret in the NBA that the Hornets are in dire need for a center, whether it be on the trade market, whether it be through this NBA draft. They need to address the center position almost as badly as any team needs to address any spot on the floor. The guys that would make sense at 13 or 15. If Jalen Duren falls to 13 from Memphis, he's a really athletic big guy that would pair excellently so with LaMelo Ball, then Jalen Duren would be the dream scenario. But I also really like the big guy out of Duke, the 7'1", 9'9" standing reach Mark Williams, who also has some athleticism despite his big frame and does an excellent job protecting the rim. If Jalen Duren is gone, I think Mark Williams would be an excellent addition there as well at that 13th spot. If they don't trade the 15th pick, which they've been reported or at least rumored to do so, if they keep it, then some names that I like there are Malachi Branham, Johnny Davis if he falls out of Wisconsin. Malachi Branham's a Buckeye, formerly just 1 year with Ohio State. I also like a Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara, who shot up draft boards ever since the combine took place, really has taken quite a few leaps in the last month or so. So those are some of the names that I like, maybe with that 15th pick. But 13, you have to take one of those centers that's available, either Jalen Duren or Mark Williams if Duren is off the board.
Got it. So you're saying they need a big man,
Yep.
and they're going to need another scorer to pair with LaMelo and Miles Bridges if they are able to keep them, which a lot of Hornets fans are hoping they are. All right, Walker, thanks so much for taking the time, man. If people want to listen to the Locked On Hornets podcast, go ahead and tell them how they can do that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hornets. We're putting out tweets every day with available links. You can catch us anywhere you get your podcast. We're also on YouTube now, so we give you a visual medium, and you get to see our reactions real time. You can follow me on Twitter at Walker Mehl. I'll be retweeting those links out as well.